Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar, Better Lab Operations Start with Better Process Management. Our presenter today is Megan Bowman, Senior Product Manager for Labbit. She has over 10 years experience working with labs and regulated organizations, and she is going to share her experience on streamlining and improving processes through business process mapping. So I'm going to hand you over to her.
Great. Thanks, Riley. Today, we're going to introduce Foundation in BPM, or Business Process Management, why it matters, and how an outside in perspective can help align operations to customer valued outcomes. From there, we'll move into BPMN essentials. We'll look at BPMN as the standard for modeling processes, the core elements used to represent process flow, and how visual modeling helps reduce ambiguity. Then we'll bring this into the context of Labbit. We'll look at how integrated BPM and connects process design directly to the execution so that the model is not just a diagram outside of a system. And finally, we'll talk about how processes can be monitored and optimized over time. I'm going to pause there. Riley, you're going to share a poll.
Yep. So the first poll question is, how familiar are you with the discipline of BPM? Okay, great. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so let's begin by establishing what business process management, or BPM, actually is. It's a discipline that organizations will adopt to close the gap between how the business operates and the value that they're delivering to their customers. BPM isn't a time bound project, it's not confined to one specific department or limited to a single tool. It's an ongoing organization wide cycle that focuses on the design, the improvement, and the management of end to end process. On the right hand side here, you can see a high level overview of that cycle. We'll go into more detail on each of these phases in later slides, but for now, let's touch upon them briefly. During the design phase is where we map and understand our organizational processes. We identify customer needs, value drivers, and expectations, and establish a baseline for performance. During the improve phase, we're focused on targeting inefficiencies, bottlenecks, constraints, and applying proven methodologies for process improvement, redesigning the process to maximize that initial value driver that we're focused on. And then during the management phase, we're ensuring governance across functions, monitoring the processes that we've put in place and the performance of them with targeted KPIs and metrics, and ensuring that the process is aligned with the business strategy. The key takeaway from this cycle is that BPM is iterative. It's never done. It's a continuous discipline that keeps customer expectations and value directly connected to the way that the business is operating. So, why invest in BPM at all? Business process management acts as a bridge. It connects that customer value driver to the operations. This slide highlights three dimensions of that value, which together form the foundation of end to end process management. First, we look at clear strategic direction. BPM ensures processes are mapped from areas that are most valuable to an organization's customers. That way, strategy is grounded in delivering against that value, not just in optimizing internal activities. It gives the organization a clear North Star for how to design and then prioritize its process. Second, alignment of resources. BPM helps ensure that the people, the technology, and the company's investments are aligned with the processes that most influence the targeted value drivers. It breaks down silos across functions and ensures that teams are working toward a shared customer and business outcome. And finally, operational discipline. BPM cultivates a culture of transparency, not just around its value drivers, but also creating clear organizational focus to deliver to that value, and establishes consistent practice for mapping and managing its process. Together, these three dimensions, strategic direction, aligned resources, and operational discipline, enable true end-to-end process management. Let's make this more concrete with a real-world scenario. On the left-hand side here, we see what happens with a functional inside-out approach. In this scenario, each department has optimized its own workflows. For example, in a diagnostics lab, the specimen collection team has focused on labeling accuracy and delivery to the lab. The processing team has optimized batching. The analysis team has optimized their instrument throughput. Individually, each function may be efficient, but from the patient's perspective, the total turnaround time for results is still much longer than expected. Now, on the right-hand side, we look at a customer outcome-focused or inside-out approach. Here, we start with the patient's expectation or the value driver for the customer, in this case, turnaround time. That becomes the anchor, and from there, we map the processes end-to-end that are most impactful to moving that value driver and establish monitoring to understand the baseline. As we analyze across the different functions, we can identify inefficiencies, dependencies, duplications, and opportunities for parallelization within the process. This often leads to shifts in how the process is designed and subsequently executed, all to ensure alignment with what the customer truly values. This represents a major mindset shift as well. Instead of asking, how can each function or department be more efficient, we ask, what does the customer need? What value are we as an organization delivering? And how do we design our processes to deliver to that value? And that's the essence of BPM, aligning processes with outcomes so that the business delivers real measurable value. And Riley, I believe you're queuing a poll.
Yep. Another poll. What is a key value driver for your lab's customers? So that should be live right now. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so now that we've aligned on what BPM is and why it's important, let's take a look at the more detailed BPM lifecycle. It's important to note that while BPM at a high level is centralized around designing, optimizing, and managing end-to-end process, there isn't one universal model for a fuller BPM lifecycle like we see here. Most organizations will adopt a lifecycle that is relevant for them or most useful. I'm presenting one here that has not only resonated strongly in my own experience, but also one that is adopted by many organizations when embarking upon BPM. This model consists of 5 core phases: define, model, execute, and monitor and optimize. It's also important to note that because this is an iterative cycle, there is a lot of overlap between the phases. So to better classify each phase of the life cycle, we'll focus on the primary goal that each phase has, the activities that occur during that phase, and a key question or statement that best summarizes the phase. During the define phase, we focus on identifying the outcomes most valuable to the customer, as well as the processes that influence those outcomes. The key question we're asking is, what processes are we focused on and why do they matter? Next, we create a representation of the process during the model phase. This is where we map out our current processes step by step, start visualizing bottlenecks, dependencies, and transitions, and even prototype new designs for improvement. Key questions we're asking during the model phase is, what do the processes actually look like and how can they look better? Now that we have the design in place, it's time to put the process into practice with the execution phase. This phase includes implementing changes, training stakeholders, executing the processes, ensuring that the execution aligns with the model design. Summarizing this phase is really a statement of let's run the process. From there, we track progress performance in real time during the monitor phase. During this phase, we're collecting data through KPIs and metrics, comparing outcomes against the goals and customer expectations. So, going back to that key value driver that we're targeting and starting to identify gaps between the value driver and the performance metrics that we're collecting. And finally, we drive continuous improvement during the optimize phase. Using the monitor data that we've collected, we can analyze root causes, apply process improvement methodologies, and suggest refinement to the process. Those refinements then feed back into the define and model stages, keeping the cycle continuous. By iteratively moving through these 5 stages, this is how organizations remain aligned with the strategy, they adapt to evolving customer needs, and they build a culture of ongoing improvement. Okay, so we've covered the BPM lifecycle. So now I'd like to focus a bit more on the model phase, specifically on the global standard that supports it, BPMN, or Business Process Model and Notation. BPMN is maintained by the Object Management Group, and it's the recognized standard for visually modeling business process. It provides a common language that both business stakeholders and technical teams can use to design and understand their processes. First, BPMN provides graphical notation in the form of business process diagrams. These diagrams use flowchart style symbols to represent the sequence of activities, events, and decisions in a process. Second, it's intuitive for business stakeholders, which makes it easy to visualize, communicate, and agree on how processes should operate. And third, it's precise enough for technical users because the BPMN can be mapped to execution languages. This ensures a process models aren't just theoretical, they can move all the way from design to execution and even automation. BPMN gives us a shared visual language for process. The vocabulary that it contains is also defined by the OMG standard. This standard organizes BPMN into small set of element categories. Knowing the 4 here is the majority that you would need to really understand most diagrams that you'd encounter. Flow objects are the main graphical elements that define how process behaves. Events that trigger or end work, activities that represent the work itself, and gateways that handle decisions and parallel paths. Connecting objects show how flow objects relate to each other, and swim lanes group the diagram by participant, so it's immediately clear who or what is responsible for each step. This is especially useful in a lab where work crosses teams, systems, and instruments. And data elements represent the information that activities consume and produce: data objects, data stores, inputs, and outputs. BPMN has clear benefits. It provides a standardized and intuitive way to model process. It aligns business users and technical teams. Everyone can share a common language for understanding process. However, historically, there has been a challenge with BPMN. As processes evolve, which we know they do pretty quickly, updating BPMN models and keeping them aligned with operational systems and informatics platforms can be challenging. This often slows agility, making it harder for organizations to adapt quickly to their changes. But this very challenge has also created an opportunity. By directly integrating BPMN into informatics platforms, we can unify process modeling with live execution, monitoring, and change management. This integration allows for real-time adaptability, so processes can be iterated on much more quickly and effectively. And this is where Labbit's advantage comes in. Labbit was the first in the LIM space to take this integrated approach, building BPMN directly into the platform as a core capability. Today, BPMN doesn't just describe the process in Labbit, it drives the process. from definition and execution to monitoring and ongoing optimization, ensuring that the processes are not stagnant. They remain current, executable, and iterative. So let's further explore how integrated BPMN can positively influence LIMS implementations. From my own experience working across multiple LIMS projects, one of the most common challenges that I've observed is a delay or even rework when stakeholders weren't aligned in the process or the right people weren't involved early enough. As a result, I would see systems get configured with incomplete or incorrect inputs, missed requirements, extra cost, and slower adoption. With embedded BPMN, those challenges are addressed head on. The visual process modeling provides transparency so stakeholders can align on workflows and, in many cases, even reevaluate and improve their process as they go into setting up this new platform. By looking at workflows end to end, BPMN ensures that the right people are engaged early in the process definition. The visual models also make it easy for teams to iterate and refine quickly as business needs evolve. And because process design is directly tied to the execution, like in Labbit, workflows can stay in sync with real world operations. And finally, adoption can even be boosted since the visual workflows are easier for teams to understand and embrace. Okay, so now that we've established the value of integrated BPMN, let's take a look at how this comes to life within the Labbit platform. What we see here is Labbit's integrated BPMN editor. The editor comes with a BPMN toolkit. We can see that outlined in red on the left there. This toolkit includes the most commonly used elements for building complete end-to-end process flows. Whether it's a simple approval flow or more complex scientific workflows, teams can construct them directly here in this interface without leaving the system. This editor supports iteration and refinement. As business needs evolve, processes can be quickly updated and optimized. These are more than just diagrams, though. They become executable models. The workflows designed in this editor can then be deployed and run within Labbit. BPMN isn't just describing the process here, it's becoming the process. Riley, you were going to do a poll here?
Sure thing. What tools do you use to map business processes today? So, launch. There we go. Just give 'em a few more seconds. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. On the previous slide, we saw the BPMN editor, where workflows are designed visually. The diagram alone, though, is not enough to run a real lab process. So, how do we go from the design model we saw in the last slide to an executable one? Behind every task in that workflow, in that BPMN canvas that we saw, there is a layer of task configuration. What we're looking at here is the configuration screen for a single task, in this case, accession samples. Notice the tabs along the top. There's task fields, patterns, groups, UI queue, UI task, validation. Each of these tabs is defining a different aspect of how this task will be executed, such as the entities that will pass through or entities that will be created from the task's execution, what data will be captured on the task or the entities, what UI components will be visible to users, what rules or validation will be enforced during the execution of the task. This detailed task configuration is part of the design and modeling phase if we go back to our BPM lifecycle. But it's also what makes the workflow executable. Because it is defined directly within the same BPMN model and editor, the visual process is connected to the underlying rules, data capture, UI behavior, and execution logic that we'll see in action when a user is in lab operations mode. Okay, so here we see an example of a workbook in lab ops mode, meaning that a user is in the system. They're not in the designer mode or the configuration mode. They're running the workflow, they're doing their work in the system. A workbook is the instantiation of a task execution. So the running of a single, if we go back to our BPMN diagram, the running of a single task within that configured workflow. When completed, it produces an electronic record that captures the data that was entered, the input entities that the task consumed, the output entities that it produced, and any reports or artifacts that were generated along the way when the task was executed. In this example, the review test and preview report task within a clinical diagnostics reporting workflow, all of the fields, the UI components, the entities, and data entry points that the operator interacts with would have all been defined in the task configuration, like we saw on the previous slide, similar to that example. So when the operator completes the workbook, the corresponding samples and other entities that were contained within the workbook advance along that BPMN sequence flow to the next task within the workflow. And the electronic record produced becomes part of the connected process history. Every workbook completion attributed to a user, tied to the entities involved, and linked to the overall process graph. This is where a Labbit aligns the process design that we went through initially and the modeling part of that to the process execution. It's one and the same. They're not disconnected from each other. So once a process is running, how do we monitor it? How do we know it's running well? That's where dashboards and monitoring come in within Labbit. We've spent a lot of time today focused on the design, the model, and execution phases. But Labbit is built to support the entire life cycle, including monitoring and optimization. With dashboards and visualizations, teams can monitor their processes' performance in real time, ensuring that workflows are running as expected, and again, evaluating them against that target value driver or outcome that they need to deliver. They can spot bottlenecks and inefficiencies quickly by looking at the metrics, and they can continue to drive optimization since these insights are directly tied back to the modeled process and executed in the platform. And just coming back to the BPM lifecycle, the optimize phase is where we apply standard methodologies to drive continuous improvement. Root cause analysis, process simulation, these are well established techniques, but in practice, they can be challenging to implement because the data they need could live in different systems and different shapes. Labbit is built on an RDF graph database, so the process data, the operations data, and the results data are all stored as connected nodes within that same graph. The graph native model is what gives the optimize phase the holistic visibility that it needs. Because the data is already connected, it becomes an AI ready foundation for predictive modeling, anomaly detection, and adaptive workflows. It also enables data science functions. Customers can aggregate this data into their own analytics pipelines, and we are extending these capabilities to support more of these use cases directly within the platform. These insights from optimization phase then feed back into the BPMN model, creating a new version of the Labbit configuration. In a regulated environment, that iteration and change must be controlled and traceable, though. So let's take a look at how Labbit handles that. Oh, before we do, though, Riley, you were going to do a poll here.
Sure thing. What types of methodologies does your organization apply to process optimization? Okay, great. Just gonna end that.
Okay, good. Good to move on, Riley.
Yes, sorry.
Great. Okay, so what we're seeing here is the change governance that has been integrated directly into the Labbit platform. Specifically, if we look at the bottom table, we see the deployment history. Each row within this history represents a deployed version of configuration to this environment. So when we talk about configuration and the life cycle, we're going back to that workflow and process definition and the task configuration behind it that drives the execution. So each version has a specific change set label, the user or system that deployed it, and the timestamp. Any two versions can also be selected and compared side to side to visually see the difference in configuration around what has changed at the BPMN level, at the task configuration level. And a configuration version can be restored when necessary. The iterative agile process improvement that we've been talking about, driven by the optimize phase, where we're identifying how we can optimize our process, is only viable in a regulated environment if change is controlled. The configuration change history provides this level of control. Every change set is versioned, attributable, and reversible. Regulated labs also need to qualify configuration change before it can be deployed to production and utilized. That's what we'll look at next. So, version control that we saw in the previous slide answers the question, what has changed? Labbit's validation assistant answers the question, is that change qualified? In regulated lab environments, qualifying a configuration change has historically been one of the lagging aspects of validating an operational change. Labbit is setting about to remove that friction. What we see here is the Labbit validation assistant qualifying a new configuration version. On the right, I've asked it to create a qualification test plan for the current configuration that I've done. The assistant analyzes the workflow and task configuration, and within minutes creates a reviewable test plan consisting of test scenarios and test scripts. Once approved and ready, the test plan can then be executed. The assistant will run the plan of scenarios and scripts, create actual workbooks and entities that can be used as evidence in validation materials, as well as produce a qualification packet that contains the run log, summary report. Qualification run is also captured and tied to this specific configuration version that was tested. So this is the point in time evidence. This configuration was qualified by this test plan, executed at this time, initiated by this person, and had these outcomes. Together, the version history we saw in the previous slide and the validation assistant are what make the full BPM lifecycle viable in a regulated environment. The optimize phase generates the ideas and suggestions for change. The version history makes those changes controlled and traceable, and the validation assistance qualifies them at the speed that we need for this type of iteration. All right, so to bring it all together, I know we're close on time. Today, we walk through business process management as a discipline that's grounded in delivering customer value and organizations' value, and BPMN as the global standard that makes process modeling executable rather than just descriptive. We saw how Labbit takes that integrated BPMN approach and applies it across the full lifecycle, designing workflows on the same model that runs them, configuring tasks where the configuration is what executes, capturing the resulting process record into the connected graph that makes monitoring and optimization possible, and governing change with version history and qualification. The BPM lifecycle isn't 5 disconnected phases. With the right foundation, it's a single connected loop that enables a regulated lab to iterate on its process. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. I'd love to hear any questions. And if you would like to see Labbit in action, please reach out through the link that's on the screen here.
Yeah, if you do have a question, you can put it in the Q&A or the chat now, if there is one. Also, I'm going to launch one last poll. Just if you're interested, whether or not you're interested in having a Labbit representative reach out to you. So I'll just launch that. So I'm not seeing any questions, which is totally fine. Just give the poll a few more moments. And okay, I think we're good. Thanks, Megan. That was great.
Great. Thank you, everyone.